Why was she here, serving coffee in a room full of men who once read her intelligence reports like gospel? Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stood near the wall of the officers' dining hall, the tray trembling slightly in her grip. Every metallic clink of cup against saucer echoed like a reminder of what she'd been reduced to. Around her, the generals and colonels talked in low voices, operations, strategy, new orders. None of it included her. She was invisible now. Just another enlisted name, borrowed for convenience. The smell of roasted coffee and starch-filled uniforms mixed with that familiar base air, polished floors, disinfectant and control. She breathed through it slowly, jaw clenched so tight it ached. She kept her gaze fixed on the coffee pot, watching the rising steam instead of the room full of indifferent eyes. It wasn't anger that stung the most, it was disappointment. This wasn't what she'd signed up for when she raised her right hand 12 years ago. She'd been 19 then, young, determined, and certain that hard work and courage could earn respect. She'd been wrong about that. Sergeant Santos. The voice earlier that morning had been cold and clipped, belonging to Captain Dixon, her company commander. "We need servers for the strategic planning conference," he'd said, without looking up from his desk. "You're on lunch duty." She thought she'd misheard. "Sir, with respect, I'm—" He cut her off before she could finish. "That's an order." There had been a pause between them, long enough for her to catch the faint smile curling at the corner of his mouth. He enjoyed it, watching her reaction, seeing the muscle in her cheek twitch as she swallowed the humiliation. It didn't matter that she was an intelligence analyst with 2 combat deployments. It didn't matter that she'd built networks in hostile villages, gathered actionable intelligence that had saved lives. It didn't even matter that she'd been awarded the Silver Star. None of it mattered. Because Captain Dixon hadn't forgotten the last training exercise, the one where her analysis had proven his decision wrong in front of senior officers. She made him look like a fool without intending to. And now this was his quiet revenge. Maria moved between tables now, refilling cups, clearing plates, keeping her eyes low. She learned long ago that not every battle deserved to be fought. Some were endured in silence, saved for another time, another battlefield. But this one cut deep. Every word she overheard was like salt on an old wound. "We can't get reliable intelligence at the village level," one general was saying. "Our soldiers don't understand the culture. They keep missing the human layer." Maria's hand trembled slightly as she poured the next cup. She wanted to speak, to tell them that she knew that layer, that she'd eaten at those tables, learned those languages, lived those customs. But she said nothing. No one was asking. She caught her reflection in the silver coffee pot, tired eyes, faint lines carved by sand and smoke. A soldier who'd seen too much and been recognized too little. Dixon passed behind her, whispering low enough that only she could hear. "Careful not to spill, Sergeant. Wouldn't want to embarrass yourself in front of the brass." Her knuckles tightened around the handle. She wanted to turn, to remind him who she was, what she'd done, but she didn't. She just nodded slightly and kept moving. It wasn't fear that held her tongue. It was pride. Somewhere inside, a quiet voice said, "Endure it. Let him talk. The truth doesn't need defending." As she reached the head table, 4 generals were deep in conversation. Their medals gleamed under the fluorescent lights, ribbons, badges, insignias that spoke of long service and command. Maria made herself small, invisible, efficient. She poured coffee without interrupting, placed the tray carefully, and turned to step away. That was when it happened. A pause, a scrape of a chair. The silver-haired general at the center of the table looked up. His eyes were sharp, alert, the kind that missed nothing. He glanced at her face first, then down toward her chest. Maria felt that familiar heat rise, the one that came from years of being underestimated, reduced, misread. She braced herself for another dismissive look. But this time, something was different. His gaze wasn't lingering in disrespect, it was searching. "Sergeant," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. The room froze, dozens of heads turned, cups hovered mid-air. Maria stiffened, unsure what she'd done wrong. The general's eyes narrowed. "Is that a silver star on your uniform?" For a moment she didn't move. Then instinctively her hand went to her chest, the small ribbon, third from the top. She'd almost forgotten she was wearing her dress uniform. "Yes, sir." The general stood abruptly, the sound of his chair scraping across the floor echoing through the hall. "For what action?" All noise vanished, the laughter, the clinking silverware gone. Maria could feel every eye in the room on her. Even Dixon had gone, still near the doorway, his face draining of color. Her voice was steady but quiet. "Wardak Province, Afghanistan, sir, 2019. The general blinked. "Wardak," he repeated louder now, "the village extraction." She hesitated, uncertain. "Yes, sir." The general turned to the men at his table, eyes widening in realization. "Gentlemen, this is her, the analyst who held off an enemy assault while coordinating the evacuation of 37 civilians and a special forces team." A murmur spread through the room, chairs shifted, someone gasped quietly. Maria felt her throat tighten. That story, her story, had been buried in classified reports. She hadn't expected anyone here to remember, let alone recognize her name. The general continued, his voice growing stronger, his eyes fixed on her. "You carried a wounded captain 3 kilometers through enemy territory. You called in danger-close airstrikes while under fire. You saved 17 American lives and countless Afghan civilians." He turned fully toward her now, coming to attention. "And we have you serving coffee." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. Captain Dixon's jaw twitched near the entrance. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came. His face had turned an unnatural shade of gray. "Someone," the general said coldly, "explain to me why a Silver Star recipient, one of the finest intelligence analysts in the United States Army, is being used as wait staff at a strategic planning conference where her expertise could actually matter." No one answered. Maria's heart pounded so hard it hurt. She didn't know whether to stand at attention, salute, or simply vanish into the floor. The general's eyes softened slightly, and he gestured to the chair beside him. "Sergeant Santos," he said, his voice calm but firm, "please sit down. We need your insights on village-level intelligence operations." The room stayed silent as she moved, each step measured, her boots clicking softly against the polished floor. She sat, her hands trembling just enough to make the pen in front of her rattle. Across the room, Captain Dixon looked like he might explode. Embarrassment and rage twisted his expression, but Maria didn't care. For the first time in months, she felt like a soldier again. The general extended his hand. "General Marcus Webb," he introduced himself. "I've read your after-action report, Sergeant. It's an honor to finally meet you." She took his hand, the grip firm, steady. "Thank you, sir." He nodded once, then raised his voice just enough for everyone in the room to hear. "And I apologize, on behalf of the United States Army, that you've been treated with anything less than the respect you've earned." The words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Years of frustration and quiet endurance seemed to tighten behind her eyes. She just nodded. The general turned back to the table. "Now," he said, his tone shifting, "Sergeant Santos, tell us about Wardak. Tell us what we've been doing wrong at the village level." Maria hesitated, unsure if she should. Old habits, deference, silence pulled at her. But then she caught sight of Dixon's reflection in the glass wall. That was enough. She straightened her back, took a breath, and spoke. "Sir, the problem isn't intelligence, it's trust." Her voice was calm, clear. You can't get human intel if the people don't believe you're human too. We treat them like data points, not lives. That's why it fails. The room was silent. The generals listened, really listened. For the first time, her words carried weight again. As the discussion unfolded, Maria felt something inside her realign. Her medals weren't just ribbons and metal. They were proof of what she'd endured, what she'd given, what she'd lost. Proof that no small-minded officer could take away what she'd earned. When the meeting ended, the general stood again. "Thank you, Sergeant. Your insight reminds us what service really means." Maria rose, saluted, and left the room with quiet dignity. She didn't look back at Dixon. She didn't need to. Some victories didn't require witnesses. Outside, the wind moved softly through the corridor, carrying the faint echo of her footsteps. She paused, exhaled, and let the tension leave her shoulders. Sometimes, she thought, dignity doesn't shout. It simply stands its ground, quietly unshaken. What do you remember when everything you love is burning? For Maria Santos, that question had never left her. It haunted her even now, echoing through the sterile halls of the base long after the general's applause faded. The moment she stepped outside the conference room, the noise of the meeting dissolved into a hum she couldn't hear. She walked down the empty corridor, her boots tapping softly against the polished tiles. Her hands were still trembling from adrenaline, her heart caught between pride and exhaustion. The silver star. She'd almost stopped thinking about it. She never wore it to impress. It had always felt more like a weight than an honor. When she closed her eyes, the memory came back hot, dusty, deafening. Wardak Province, Afghanistan, 2019. It was never supposed to be combat. She was an intelligence analyst attached to a special forces team for local coordination. Her mission: manage relationships with the village elders, collect patterns, listen more than speak. Simple, controlled, but nothing in Wardak stayed simple for long. That morning had started with sunlight and the faint call to prayer drifting across the valley. The village of Surrey Kell sat at the base of a ridge, framed by endless brown hills and orchards of dying pomegranate trees. Kids had followed them when they arrived, curious, laughing, waving makeshift paper kites. Maria remembered the smell of dust and bread baking over open fires. Then came the sound that still followed her, the distant crack of rifles, the kind of sound that made the body react before the mind could. It began as a rumor on the radio, possible movement east of the ridge. But within minutes, the valley erupted. Bullets tore through the quiet morning like a storm breaking open the sky. Maria hit the ground behind a low wall, dirt exploding around her. "Contact east," someone shouted. Voices tangled with static, too many commands at once. The first explosion sent a wave of dust rolling through the street. She crawled to the radio man, a kid, barely 20. His face was pale beneath the dust, his hands fumbling with the headset. "They're cutting off the east road," he said, panic edging his voice. "Then we move west," she replied, trying to steady him. "Get the civilians inside the schoolhouse." It wasn't her job to command, but leadership in chaos doesn't ask for permission. Captain Reeves, the team lead, was already bleeding, a graze across his shoulder, but still upright. "We've got 37 locals sheltering in that compound," he said, gesturing toward the mud-walled building behind them. "If that ridge gets flanked, we lose them." Maria checked her rifle. The sound of distant shouting grew louder, not English but Pashto. She understood just enough to know what they were saying. "Move in. Don't let them escape." "Air support?" she asked. Reeves shook his head. "Denied, too close to civvies." Of course it was. Too close always meant too late. Minutes bled into chaos. Mortar rounds hit the outskirts of the village, shaking the ground like thunder. Dust turned the world into a blur of movement, figures in the haze, muzzle flashes, the echo of pain. Maria ran between positions, directing the civilians, pulling children through doorways, shouting over the noise. "Stay down, don't move." One of the locals, a man named Farid, who had once shared tea with her under a tree, grabbed her arm. "They are coming," he said, his voice trembling, "from the north." "How many?" she asked. "Too many." Then the radio hissed, a voice cutting through. "We're losing the ridge. We need cover fire." Maria turned to Reeves. "We can't hold both sides." He looked at her, blood seeping through his sleeve. "We don't have to. We just have to buy time for evac." The first helicopter was 10 minutes out. 10 minutes. In combat, that might as well have been a lifetime. When the next explosion hit, it threw her against the wall. Her ears rang, vision spinning. She blinked, dazed, tasting blood. Reeves was down, hit in the leg this time. She crawled to him, dragging him into cover. "Stay with me," she yelled, slapping his vest to keep him conscious. His voice cracked through the noise. "Call it in, Santos. You're in charge." She didn't argue. She just took the radio, pressed it to her mouth, and said, "Thunderstrike, this is Raven 3. I need air support, danger close, grid coordinates Alpha 69 or 5. "Negative, Raven 3, came the reply. "Too close to friendlies." Maria's tone hardened. "Then make it surgical." The pause on the other end stretched long enough to make her heart pound. "Then copy, Raven 3, 30 seconds. She turned to the civilians huddled in the compound, her voice shaking. "Stay down. Everyone down now." The roar came like the sky itself collapsing, a single streak of fire tearing across the ridge. The explosion hit less than 200 meters away, the shockwave flattening the orchard, throwing dirt and rock into the air. Silence followed, heavy, unnatural silence, then faintly crying, the children, they were alive. Maria pressed the radio to her lips again, voice raw. "Strike confirmed. Target neutralized. Evac inbound." The first helicopter appeared minutes later, kicking up clouds of dust as it descended. Maria and 2 others carried Reeves on a makeshift stretcher. She didn't feel her own injuries, the shrapnel embedded in her side, the blood soaking through her uniform. "Go," someone shouted. "You're last." She refused. "Not until they're all out." The second chopper took off under fire. Maria watched it rise, shielding her face from the debris. Then came another burst of gunfire, closer this time. One of the Afghan civilians, an elderly man, stumbled in the open. Without thinking, Maria ran. She reached him, pulling him toward the last truck as bullets shredded the dirt inches from her boots. A round grazed her arm, but she barely flinched. They made it behind cover, barely. The evac crew tried to pull her into the last vehicle, but she stopped halfway. She turned to look back at the smoke, the ridge, the shattered village she'd tried to protect. It looked like every place she'd ever been, beauty and destruction sharing the same breath. When she finally climbed into the truck, the pilot looked back, eyes wide. "You're hit." "I know," she said. "Just get us out." As the chopper lifted off, Maria pressed her hand to her side, watching the valley shrink below. For a brief second, she saw the kites again, one red, one blue, tangled in the wind above the ruins. That was the last image she remembered before everything went dark. She woke up 3 days later in a field hospital outside Bagram. The first thing she saw was the white ceiling, the second, a folded American flag on the next cot. Captain Reeves didn't make it. The medic told her she'd saved 37 civilians and 17 soldiers. They told her she was a hero. She didn't feel like one. For weeks she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ridge, the smoke, the children's faces. She heard the static of the radio, that hollow pause before permission came. 30 seconds. She stayed in country another 3 months, finishing her assignment. When they finally sent her home, the Silver Star came in the mail. No ceremony, no fanfare, just an envelope with her name and a citation that summarized hell in 3 paragraphs. She tucked it away in a drawer, unopened for weeks. When she finally pinned it to her uniform, she did it quietly, in an empty barracks room. Now standing in the present years later, back at base, the memory still pulsed beneath her skin like an old scar that never healed. As she walked toward the barracks that night, the lights flickered across the wet pavement. The base was quiet, the kind of quiet that followed long days and heavy thoughts. In her room, she removed her jacket, placed it neatly on the chair, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silver star gleamed faintly under the dim lamp. She stared at it for a long time. Recognition felt strange, like light falling on a wound you learned to hide. The general's words replayed in her mind. "We have you serving coffee." It wasn't anger she felt anymore. It was relief. Not because someone had finally noticed, but because truth, for once, had spoken without her needing to. She remembered a phrase her father used to say before she enlisted. "Respect doesn't need noise, Mija. The quiet ones are the ones who endure." He'd been right. She looked out the window, where the faint hum of the airfield drifted in from the distance. Engines, lights, wind. Somewhere out there, young soldiers were preparing for another deployment. Another mission that would test everything they believed about loyalty, duty, and sacrifice. Maria closed her eyes. She wasn't bitter, just tired. Tired of having to prove that courage didn't always come with rank. She leaned back, exhaling softly. The memory of Wardeck settled like dust in her chest, heavy, but still hers. Sometimes honor doesn't shine. Sometimes it bleeds quietly and keeps walking. How fast does a secret travel in a military base? Faster than the wind, slower than the truth. By morning, everyone knew. The story had spread like spilled ink, how a Silver Star recipient had been ordered to serve coffee at a general's conference, how a 4-star had stopped mid-meeting to demand an explanation, how Captain Dixon had stood frozen, pale as chalk, while the whole room watched. No one said it aloud, but everyone whispered it in the hallways. They said her name now, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos. For years, she'd been the quiet one, the one who stayed late at the analysis room, redrawing terrain grids, double-checking intercept logs. She was there before dawn and long after others clocked out, invisible but precise. Now, she was the woman who'd made the general stand. Maria tried to ignore it. She moved through the barracks like nothing had changed, but everything had. At breakfast, conversations dropped when she entered. At the motor pool, junior soldiers nodded respectfully. Even the old sergeants, the ones too proud to show deference, gave her space. But Captain Dixon, he avoided her completely. When he passed her in the hallway, his eyes never met hers. His voice, once sharp and dismissive, was now measured, almost polite. It wasn't remorse, it was fear. Maria didn't want vengeance, she wanted peace. But peace had never been easy in uniform. That afternoon, as she was finishing a report, her comms pinged. "Sergeant Santos, report to Command Section B. General Webb requests your presence." She stared at the message for a moment, unsure if it was real. Then she straightened her uniform, brushed her sleeve, and walked. Command Section B was the kind of room that carried history. Polished mahogany tables, flags along the walls, and portraits of men who made decisions that changed continents. When she entered, General Webb was standing by the window, reading a file. Sunlight slanted across his face, illuminating the deep lines of someone who'd seen too many wars and buried too many soldiers. "Sergeant," he said, looking up, at ease. She stood straight anyway. "Sir." He gestured to the chair. "Sit, please." She did, cautious. Webb placed the file on the table. "You made quite an impression yesterday." She said nothing. "That's not a compliment," he added gently. "It's an observation." Maria waited. She learned long ago that silence was its own form of discipline. Webb opened the file, her record. She recognized the pages even from across the table. Deployment logs, commendations, field evaluations. Her life in paper form. "You've been under Captain Dixon for 3 years," he said. "No disciplinary marks, no complaints." "None that I filed, sir." Webb raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Maria hesitated. "Meaning there were things that weren't worth the ink, sir." The general nodded slowly. "Fair answer." He flipped another page. "You've been eligible for promotion for over a year. Any reason you didn't apply?" "I was told I wasn't ready." "By who?" "Captain Dixon." Webb closed the file. The sound echoed softly in the quiet room. "You know, Sergeant, I've read your after-action report from Wardeck at least 5 times, but reading it and hearing it in person are two different things. You didn't just hold a perimeter, you coordinated an evacuation, neutralized hostiles, and stabilized a wounded officer while under continuous fire." Her eyes dropped slightly. "It was a team effort, sir." "Humility's good," he said, "but don't hide behind it. Courage doesn't need to apologize." Maria's throat tightened. The words hit deeper than she expected. The general leaned forward. "I'm forming a small advisory group on cultural intelligence, field coordination, local integration, non-traditional operations. I want you on it." Her head lifted sharply. "Sir, you've lived what most of these analysts only simulate in PowerPoint. You understand the human terrain, the kind no satellite can map. You'd brief command teams before deployment." Maria hesitated. "I appreciate that, sir, but Dixon—" "Captain Dixon won't be your concern anymore." Webb's tone was final. "I've already reassigned him. He's going to administrative training at Fort Leonard. Consider it professional distance." A pause stretched between them, part disbelief, part relief. Then Webb continued softly. "You've earned this, Sergeant, not as a favor, as recognition." Maria took a slow breath. "Thank you, sir." He smiled faintly. "Don't thank me yet, it's not an easy role. You'll be in rooms where you're the only enlisted voice. They'll underestimate you again. But this time you'll speak." She nodded once, understood. As she stood to leave, Webb added one last thing. "One more thing, Sergeant. What you did in that dining hall, standing there silent, when you had every right to speak, that's discipline. And sometimes it's that kind of silence that changes everything." The next few days passed like a slow sunrise after a long storm. Maria began her new assignment in a quiet corner of the intelligence wing, a glass-walled room with a single table and stacks of operation briefs. Her task was clear: review current counterinsurgency protocols, identify gaps between human and digital intel, and design strategies to bridge them. In short, teach them how to listen. At first, the other officers didn't know what to make of her. She was enlisted, lower rank, out of place in a room of captains and majors. But when she spoke, her words carried weight. "The map tells you where," she said in one meeting, tracing her finger over a terrain grid. "But people tell you why. If you don't know the why, the map doesn't matter." Her quiet authority drew attention, not from ego but from truth. After each meeting, 1 or 2 officers would approach her privately, asking for advice on their regions. She never refused. Knowledge, she believed, only mattered if it was shared. But peace never lasts long in uniform. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the corridors emptied, Maria received a call on her secure line. "Sergeant Santos." "Speaking." "This is Colonel Ryan, Operations Director for the Eastern Sector. We have an urgent situation developing overseas. General Webb recommended you personally." She straightened. "Sir." "There's been an incident in Gibran Province, local forces compromised, intel links cut. We need someone with field credibility and cultural experience to coordinate extraction planning. Command thinks you're the right fit." The air around her seemed to tighten. Another mission, another chance to return to the chaos she'd spent years trying to forget. "When do we deploy?" she asked. "Briefing at 600 tomorrow." The line went dead. Maria sat for a moment, the silence pressing against her chest. She looked down at her uniform, the faint glint of the silver star still pinned near her heart. She promised herself she was done with field operations. That war deck would be her last battlefield. But promises in the military rarely survived reality. She exhaled slowly. Maybe this isn't punishment, she thought. Maybe it's purpose finding its way back. That night she walked the perimeter road behind the barracks, the one that overlooked the training grounds. The floodlights painted the earth in pale gold. Soldiers jogged in groups, their cadence chants echoing through the cool air. She remembered when she used to lead those runs, younger, faster, unscarred, back when everything still felt simple. She stopped by the fence, staring out at the horizon. Beyond it, darkness stretched silent, endless. Her thoughts drifted to Captain Dixon. She'd heard he was leaving the base that morning, reassigned quietly with no fanfare. Part of her had wanted to confront him, to say something. But what could she say that mattered? That she forgave him. That she pitied him. Neither felt right. Instead, she'd left an envelope on his desk before he departed, a single sheet of paper inside. Sir, command taught me to respect the rank, even when I can't respect the man. But for what it's worth, I hope one day you understand that leadership isn't measured by who stands beneath you, but by who stands because of you. No signature, just her handwriting. She didn't know if he'd read it. She didn't need to. Sometimes closure isn't loud. It's just the sound of footsteps walking away. Back in her quarters, Maria packed lightly, a duffel, a field kit, a single photo tucked in the side pocket. It was one taken years ago, her team at Wardak, before the smoke, before the loss. Reeves was in the center, grinning, dirt-streaked and alive. She traced his outline with her thumb. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "We're not done yet, Captain." Then she zipped the bag shut. Sleep came late that night, restless, shallow. Between flashes of dream and memory, she kept hearing the same voice in her head. "You've earned this, Sergeant, not as a favor, as recognition." At dawn, she woke to the sound of helicopters warming up in the distance. She dressed quickly, tightening her boots, adjusting her sleeves. Her reflection in the mirror looked steady, calm eyes, sharp jaw, the quiet readiness of someone who'd seen what war takes and still chose to show up. She picked up her duffel, turned off the light, and stepped into the cold morning air. The base was waking, trucks moving, orders shouted, metal clanging, the familiar rhythm of controlled chaos. Maria walked toward the operations wing, her shadow long across the tarmac. For the first time in years, she felt the pull of purpose again, not pride, not anger, but alignment. She wasn't serving coffee anymore. She was serving what she'd always believed in, the idea that dignity doesn't come from rank, but from what you choose to carry when no one else will. The wind shifted, cool against her face. Somewhere behind her, the flags flapped against the early light. And as she disappeared into the briefing room, one thought settled deep within her, calm, resolute, unshakable. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive like a rescue. Sometimes it walks quietly back into the fight. What do you do when the mission you're sent to complete doesn't feel right? That question would follow Maria Santos across an ocean and into another desert, one that looked different from Wardak, but carried the same taste of dust and uncertainty. Jibrin Province, Northern Corridor. The region was fractured, half controlled by a coalition-backed local force, half by tribal militias with shifting loyalties. The Americans weren't supposed to be there officially. Advisory presence was the term used in briefings, but Maria knew what that meant when politics dressed itself as precision. The plane descended over a barren landscape scarred by years of conflict. Brown hills, scattered compounds, dry riverbeds. The same silence that followed every war zone she'd ever known. She stepped onto the tarmac at dawn. The air was dry, sharp, and carried the smell of diesel and sand. A convoy of armored trucks waited near the edge of the field. Staff Sergeant Santos. A tall man approached mid-40s, sunburned, wearing a contractor's vest instead of a uniform. His handshake was rough, impersonal. Tom Vickers, civil liaison. I was told you'd be running coordination for intel flow. Maria nodded. Where's the command post? Forward base 5 clicks north. We'll brief you en route. They drove in silence for a while, the truck rattling over uneven dirt roads. The landscape stretched endlessly, broken villages, fields of dry wheat, an occasional shepherd herding goats through ruins. Vickers broke the silence. I heard about your last tour, Wardek Province, right? The Silver Star. Maria didn't answer immediately. That was a long time ago. Still hell of a story. Not many analysts pull that off. I didn't pull anything off, she said quietly. I just survived it. He looked at her, then nodded. Fair enough. The convoy passed through a small settlement, mud houses patched with sheets of tin, kids watching from behind fences. Maria met their eyes briefly. Some smiled, some didn't. War-aged children differently here. The forward base was small, a cluster of prefab surrounded by HESCO barriers and a single flagpole leaning slightly in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of metal, sweat, and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Colonel Ryan, the man who'd called her from command, stood by a table cluttered with maps. His voice was steady, practiced, the kind that belonged to someone who'd learned to control chaos by never showing fear. Sergeant Santos, good to have you here, he said, extending a hand. We're in a tight spot. Local informants have gone dark. Our allies on the ground are asking for support, but we're getting conflicting intel about who's loyal to whom. Your job is to clean this up fast. Maria studied the maps. Which local unit are we partnered with? Gibran Defense Front, Ryan replied. General Farouk leads it, officially aligned with the coalition. Unofficially, he hesitated. There are rumors, smuggling, internal disputes, even civilian displacement. We can't confirm what's true. Maria frowned, and we're supporting them. For now, Ryan said. Our orders are to maintain operational stability until political negotiations finalize. The words political negotiations always made her uneasy. They were the camouflage that covered moral uncertainty. Understood, sir, she said. He tapped the map. There's a village east of here, Al Safa. That's where most of our intel gaps are coming from. I want you to meet with General Farouk, assess his reliability, and re-establish civilian contact. Think of it as hearts and minds work. Maria nodded. When do we leave? Now. They traveled with 2 vehicles, hers and Vickers's, bouncing across rough terrain under the rising sun. Dust swirled around them in golden clouds. General Farouk's compound sat atop a low ridge overlooking the valley, a concrete fortress surrounded by walls and armed guards. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of tobacco and diesel. Farouk himself was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, dressed in a pressed uniform that didn't quite hide the fatigue beneath his eyes. He smiled when he saw Maria, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Ah, the American hero, he said in accented English. The woman who fought in Wardak, my men speak of you. Maria returned a polite nod. I'm not here as a hero, General. I'm here to help coordinate operations. Farouk laughed softly. Of course, everyone here is to help. Sit, please. They spoke for nearly an hour about security routes, insurgent cells, and the challenges of maintaining order. But as the conversation deepened, Maria began to sense the gaps, the small hesitations, the details that didn't match. She asked about the civilian evacuations from Al Safa. Farouk's tone changed. Necessary measures, he said, waving it off. Some villagers collaborated with militants. We relocated them for safety. Where, she asked. He smiled again. Somewhere safer. It wasn't an answer. Vickers shifted uncomfortably beside her. Maria made a mental note. Vague answers always meant hidden truths. Before leaving, Farouk placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are different, Sergeant. You listen. That is good. But sometimes listening too much brings trouble." She met his gaze. Sometimes trouble's already there. Listening just finds it. His smile faltered for a moment. Then he let go. Back at base, Maria reviewed the drone footage and satellite feeds. The eastern villages looked deserted. Too deserted. No heat signatures, no livestock movement, no sign of daily life. She cross-checked with refugee intake logs, nothing. No recorded displacement. No camps set up. The people of Al-Safa hadn't moved. They'd vanished. That night she stayed late in the operations room, the only sound the hum of the monitors. The desert outside was black and silent. Vickers walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You're still at it." "Something's wrong," she said, not looking up. "The villages Farouk claims to have evacuated, they're empty, but there's no record of where the people went. It's like they never existed." Vickers handed her a mug. "You think he's lying?" "I think he's hiding something," she said, "and we're helping him do it." He hesitated. "You're not planning to go digging without approval, are you?" Maria gave a small, tired smile. "You've read my file, haven't you?" Vickers sighed. "Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of." The next morning, Maria requested a recon patrol eastward for terrain familiarization. Ryan approved it without question. They left before dawn, Maria, Vickers, and 2 local guides. The desert was still, the air cool. The horizon stretched endlessly, like an ocean made of dust. After 2 hours, they reached the edge of Al-Safa. The village lay silent, half buried in sand. Doors hung open. Pots still sat on stoves. It looked as if life had stopped mid-sentence. Maria moved cautiously between buildings, scanning the ground. "Tracks," she murmured. "Lots of them, footprints, tire marks, fresh." She followed them behind a wall where the earth dipped into a shallow ravine. What she saw made her stop cold. Shallow graves, rows of them. Her breath caught. The world seemed to tilt. She knelt down, brushing sand from one of the mounds. The edge of a child's sandal stuck out. Vickers froze behind her. "Jesus." Maria stood slowly, staring at the horizon. These weren't evacuations. She took photos, every angle, every mark. Her hands shook as she documented, methodical, professional. But inside, something broke loose. That same fire she'd felt years ago in Wardak when orders didn't match the truth. "We need to report this," Vickers said, his voice low. She nodded. "We will." But before they could move, a voice echoed from behind. "Sergeant Santos." They turned. Farouk's men stood there, 6 of them, rifles raised. "General Farouk requests your return," the leader said. "Now." Maria met Vickers's eyes. No words, just understanding. Back at the compound, the air was heavy with tension. Farouk waited in the courtyard, his expression unreadable. "You were told to observe," he said quietly, "not to trespass." Maria didn't flinch. "You lied to us. Those villages weren't relocated, they were executed." Farouk's eyes hardened. "You think you understand this place. You think you know who the enemy is. Those people sheltered killers who murdered my men. I did what your own commanders would have done if it were Americans buried there." Her jaw tightened. "There's always a choice." He stepped closer. "Spare me your Western morality. Out here, survival is the only choice." Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then maybe we're no different after all." He studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Leave it alone, Sergeant. You are a guest here. Don't mistake that for immunity." When she returned to base, she filed her report directly to Colonel Ryan, classified, encrypted, detailed. He read it twice, his face unreadable. Then he sighed. "These are serious accusations, Santos." "They're not accusations," she said. "They're evidence." Ryan rubbed his temples. "You understand what this means if we act on it. Farouk's our only stable partner in this region. Exposing this could collapse the alliance, and with it, months of negotiations. Maria's voice stayed calm. Sir, if we ignore it, we're complicit. He looked up at her, eyes tired. You've been in long enough to know the difference between moral clarity and political reality. She met his gaze. Reality doesn't bury children, sir. Men do. The silence between them stretched. Then Ryan closed the file. Leave it with me. I'll take it up the chain. But Maria saw it in his eyes, hesitation, calculation, fear. The same look she'd seen too many times before. When she left the office, the night air hit her like a wave. She walked to the edge of the compound and looked out at the desert, the same horizon that hid the graves she couldn't unsee. Her hands clenched into fists. She had followed orders her whole career. But for the first time, she wasn't sure she could anymore. Sometimes the hardest battle isn't in the field. It's the one between obedience and conscience, and which one you're willing to live with when the silence comes. How much truth can one soldier carry before it breaks her? Maria Santos didn't sleep that night. The desert outside her quarters was quiet, too quiet. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers, voices she couldn't shut out. The faces of the villagers from Al Safa haunted her each time she closed her eyes. She saw the sandals, the small mound of earth, the hollow emptiness of a place that once breathed life. She spent most of the night reviewing the images on her secure tablet, frame by frame, grave by grave. Each photo felt like another wound she couldn't clean. The numbers didn't lie. The coordinates matched the grid where Farouk had claimed to have relocated civilians. She included those coordinates in her report to Colonel Ryan, along with evidence of falsified communication logs from Farouk's command. But deep down, she knew what was coming. Silence, or worse, denial. By morning, that silence arrived wrapped in formality. At 700, Colonel Ryan summoned her. His office smelled of stale coffee and stress. A half-burned candle sat beside a stack of folders, wax dripping down its side like time melting away. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit down, Sergeant." Maria obeyed, keeping her posture rigid. Ryan finally raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, not from guilt, but from the exhaustion of a man caught between orders and conscience. "I sent your report up the chain," he said. "The response came back this morning." Maria waited. He sighed. "Command has decided not to pursue an investigation." Her heart sank, though she'd expected it. Not pursue. Ryan nodded. "They say there's insufficient evidence, that Farouk's actions fall under regional stabilization measures." Regional stabilization. Her voice cracked, disbelief mixing with anger. "Sir, we have photographic proof of mass graves." "I know," he said quietly, "but they don't want another scandal. We're already stretched thin politically. They want to maintain alliances until the withdrawal plan finalizes." Maria leaned forward, her voice trembling now not from fear but from restraint. "Sir, those weren't insurgents. They were children. You saw the photos." Ryan's silence was an answer. "Sir," she pressed, "you can't bury this." He met her gaze finally, and there was something like sorrow in his eyes. "You're right, but sometimes command buries what it can't fix." She stood abruptly. "Then maybe command needs fixing." Ryan's tone hardened. "Watch yourself, Sergeant." Maria stopped. The old instinct to obey flickered, but it was faint now, almost gone. "Yes, sir," she said flatly. When she left his office, the corridor felt narrower, colder. Soldiers passed her without noticing the storm behind her eyes. She wasn't angry for herself anymore. She was angry for every faceless civilian, every soldier who believed that decency and duty could coexist. But as she stepped outside, the desert light struck her face, hot, blinding, and she knew she couldn't stay silent. Not this time. By evening, Maria had made her decision. She sat at the operations terminal, the hum of the air conditioner masking her keystrokes. She accessed her classified files, cross-referencing timestamps, coordinates, encrypted drone feeds. Every detail matched. Every lie that Farouk had told was verifiable. Her cursor hovered over one folder labeled Unverified Field Data. She opened it and began to write. The document wasn't a report. It was a confession not of guilt, but of conscience. She wrote plainly, "On 22 March 2025, I discovered evidence of systematic civilian executions carried out by Allied militia units under General Farouk. Despite photographic confirmation and corroborating signals data, higher command has chosen not to investigate. This constitutes a direct violation of the Geneva Convention and the UCMJ. I take full responsibility for releasing this information if it prevents further loss of innocent life." When she finished, her hand hovered over the send key. If she transmitted it through the official network, it would vanish filtered, redacted, buried. She needed another path. Vickers. He'd been with her at the gravesite. He'd seen it too. He wasn't military, which meant he could act where she couldn't. She found him in the vehicle bay, checking a comms array. "You look like you haven't slept in days," he said, forcing a smile. "Neither have you," she replied. He studied her face. "What's wrong?" "Command buried it." He froze. "The report." She nodded. "They're calling it stabilization." He swore under his breath. "Of course they are." "I can't let it stand," she said. "I have the files, every image, every log. I want them transmitted to the oversight office directly. Civilian channels." Vickers hesitated. "That's dangerous, Maria. You'll burn every bridge you have." "They already buried the bridge," she said softly. "I'm just lighting the wreckage." He looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for hesitation. There was none. "Okay," he said finally. "You give me the drive. I'll route it through an encrypted channel. If they trace it, it'll come back to me, not you." She shook her head. "No, I won't let you take that hit." He smiled faintly. "You forget I'm not enlisted. They can't court-martial me. You, on the other hand." Maria exhaled, her throat tightening. "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged. "Because someone has to, and because I've seen what happens when good people stay quiet." They met that night in the comms tent. The generator hummed softly in the background, casting flickers of light across their faces. Maria handed him the encrypted drive. Their fingers brushed, a brief human connection in a place built on orders and consequences. "If anything happens," she began. "Don't finish that sentence," Vickers said gently. "Nothing's going to happen." But they both knew it might. He inserted the drive, initiating the transfer. Data flowed across the screen, lines of text, images, coordinates. Each file a fragment of truth moving into the light. When it was done, he ejected the drive and looked at her. "It's out. Civilian oversight, independent route. It's untraceable from here." She nodded slowly, relief mixing with dread. "Thank you." He smiled again, weary, genuine. "Let's just hope someone up there still gives a damn." The next morning, the world changed. She was summoned to the command tent before sunrise. The air felt heavier, the guards at the door more alert. Colonel Ryan was waiting inside. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp. On the table lay a printed dossier, her report, the one she'd written last night. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. Ryan's expression didn't waver. "Long enough. The Oversight Office contacted Central Command. They traced the metadata." Maria's chest tightened. "You mean they traced me?" He didn't deny it. "You violated direct protocol, transmitted classified material outside authorized channels, and compromised operational integrity." "Operational integrity," she repeated, anger sparking in her voice. "You mean moral integrity." "Enough," he snapped, slamming a hand on the table. "Do you realize what you've done? You've jeopardized an entire operation." I exposed a massacre, she said flatly. Ryan's voice softened just enough to sound human. You did the right thing in the wrong way, Sergeant, and that distinction matters. She met his eyes. Not to the dead, sir. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Finally, he exhaled. Command, ordering your immediate extraction. You'll return stateside for debrief and administrative review. Until then, you're relieved of duty. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed calm. Yes, sir. Ryan looked down, rubbing his temples. For what it's worth, I don't disagree with what you did, but I can't protect you from what comes next. I didn't ask for protection, she said softly, just accountability. When she stepped outside, the desert air hit her like a wave. The sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and ash. Vickers was waiting near the vehicle line, tension in his eyes. They know, don't they? She nodded. He cursed under his breath. I'm sorry, I rerouted everything I could. You did what you had to, she said. So did I. A helicopter waited nearby, its rotors slicing through the morning air. Maria grabbed her duffel and turned to him. What happens to the report now? She asked. He hesitated. If it's out, it's out. Command can't kill every channel. Someone will see it. Someone will ask questions. Good, she said. Vickers stepped closer. They'll come after you, Maria. They always do. She smiled faintly. Then they'll know I'm not hiding. He extended his hand. She took it firm and steady. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. Then she boarded the helicopter. As it lifted off, she looked down at the base shrinking beneath her, a patch of order in a sea of chaos. She thought of the graves at Al Safa, of the children, of every silence she'd once mistaken for peace. The wind from the rotors whipped through her hair. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. For the first time in years, Maria Santos wasn't following orders. She was following conscience. And though the cost would be heavy, career, reputation, everything she'd built, she knew this truth. Sometimes obedience serves structure, but disobedience serves humanity. What happens when a soldier stops being useful but refuses to be silent? For Maria Santos, the answer came wrapped in orders and silence. The flight home was long, unmarked, and devoid of conversation. The two MPs seated across from her barely looked up. Their rifles rested between their knees, not as a threat, but as a reminder she wasn't trusted anymore. Through the window, the desert faded into clouds, then into the dark blue expanse of the upper atmosphere. She pressed her hand to the cold glass. She'd been here before, leaving one war behind, unsure if peace was waiting on the other side. When they landed at Andrews, there were no salutes, no press, no welcome-back banners. Just a government sedan and a silent escort. The debriefing facility was windowless and gray, somewhere between a prison and an office. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, the air recycling too perfectly. Maria sat in a small interrogation room, hands clasped on the table. No cuffs. Not yet. But the message was clear. She was Staff Sergeant Santos, Silver Star recipient. She was a subject of investigation. The door opened. A civilian woman entered, crisp suit, neutral expression. She placed a recorder on the table. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, she said, pressing a button. This interview is being conducted under Directive 1247 concerning unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Her voice was polite, almost kind but distant, like a nurse prepping a needle. Maria nodded once, understood. The woman opened a folder. You transmitted restricted data to unauthorized channels, bypassing encryption protocols, resulting in potential compromise of coalition operations. Do you admit to this? I transmitted evidence of a war crime, Maria said evenly. That's not the question. It's the answer. The woman's pen hesitated above her notepad. You understand, Sergeant, That intent doesn't absolve the act. Maria leaned forward slightly. Neither does denial. For a moment, silence filled the room, not tension, just fatigue. Two professionals on opposite sides of a truth too big to simplify. The interviewer sighed. Off the record, I read the file. What you uncovered, it won't disappear, but it has to go through channels. Channels, Maria repeated. The same ones that buried it in the first place. The woman didn't respond. She simply closed the folder, stood, and said, "You'll be notified of administrative action pending review." Then she left. Days blurred into sameness. Meals, questioning, long hours of waiting in sterile rooms. They called it protective isolation, though it felt more like being erased one day at a time. No phone, no rank insignia, no news. The only sound was the ticking of a clock and the echo of her own thoughts. At night, she'd lie awake on the narrow cot, watching shadows shift across the ceiling. Her mind drifted back to Wardak, to Gibran, to the moments when doing the right thing had cost less than breathing. She thought of Vickers. Had he made it out safely? Did the file reach someone who cared? She'd never know. Sometimes she caught herself whispering lines from her father's letters, words he'd written long ago when she was still a cadet. Mija, courage isn't loud. It's the quiet choice you make when nobody's watching. She smiled faintly in the dark. I hope you'd still be proud, Dad. On the seventh day, the door opened again. But this time, it wasn't the investigator. General Marcus Webb stepped inside. For a heartbeat, Maria didn't believe it. His presence carried weight, not from rank alone, but from the air of someone who'd seen both victory and regret and knew the difference. "Sergeant," he greeted quietly, "at ease. You look like you've been through hell." She stood anyway. "Sir." Webb gestured to the chair. "Sit." When she did, he took the seat across from her, resting a folder on the table. "I heard what happened." "News travels fast, sir." "Not fast enough," he said. "You were right about Gibran." Maria blinked. "Sir." "The Oversight Office launched an inquiry. Someone higher up leaked your report to a civilian journalist. It's everywhere now, not by name, but the evidence. The photos, the graves, the world knows." Her breath caught, then they saw it. "They did," he nodded slowly. "Command scrambling. The alliance is fractured, but there's an investigation underway, and General Farouk's been removed from command." She felt the weight lift, if only slightly. So it mattered. "It mattered," Webb said, leaning back, "but it also came with consequences." "I know, sir. I'll take them." He studied her face for a long moment. "You remind me of someone I served with years ago. Different war, same conviction. She didn't always win, but she never compromised." He opened the folder. Inside was a single document, stamped, sealed. He slid it across to her. "Effective immediately," he said. "You're reinstated to active service under provisional reassignment. No charges filed. Officially, the review found procedural breach, but not intent of espionage." Maria frowned. "That sounds like a polite way to say we're done talking about it." Webb smiled faintly. "You're learning how the system protects itself." She glanced at the paper again. "Why are you doing this for me?" "Because sometimes," he said, "the army forgets that the ones who break the rules for the right reasons are the ones keeping its soul alive." Maria exhaled slowly, trying to process the words. Webb stood, his voice softening. "You've still got a place here, Sergeant, but if you choose to walk away, no one will blame you." She looked up at him. "And if I stay?" "Then make it count. Lead differently. Teach them what moral courage looks like before it gets buried under protocol." He placed a hand on her shoulder, brief, respectful. "The truth may cost you your peace, Santos, but history tends to remember those who told it." Then he left. That night Maria was escorted out of the facility. The air outside was damp with rain, the first she'd felt in months. It smelled like earth, alive, unfiltered. A driver waited beside an unmarked SUV. She climbed in without a word. As the car moved through the quiet streets, she watched raindrops streak down the window like memories sliding into silence. Freedom didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion, a reprieve earned through stubbornness. When she reached the temporary barracks, her old duffel bag was waiting, cleaned and folded. Her medals lay inside, still pinned to the jacket she'd worn months ago. She lifted the silver star between her fingers, turning it under the dim light. It no longer looked like glory. It looked like weight, the kind forged from doing what others wouldn't. She pinned it back in place, not for pride but for remembrance. Weeks passed quietly after that. Maria was transferred to a small training detachment, no field ops, just lectures and mentorship. The kind of post that kept you visible but contained. She didn't mind. It gave her time to breathe, to think. She worked with new recruits, kids barely out of high school, eyes wide with ambition. They called her ma'am out of respect more than regulation. She taught them more than tactics. She taught them restraint, empathy, discernment. Don't confuse obedience with loyalty, she'd say during briefings. The first serves orders, the second serves people. The room always went quiet after that. One evening after class, a young private stayed behind. His name tag read Reynolds. "Ma'am," he said, hesitating, "I read about that thing overseas, that report. Was that you?" Maria smiled faintly. "You're not supposed to ask that." He looked embarrassed. "Sorry, ma'am, I just wanted to say if it was, thank you." She tilted her head. "For what?" "For proving we're supposed to stand for something." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she nodded once. "You're welcome, Private." Later that night, as the base settled into quiet, Maria sat outside the barracks on a low bench, watching the sky. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and clear. She thought of Webb, of his quiet kindness, his courage disguised as bureaucracy. She thought of Vickers and the risk he'd taken. And she thought of the nameless villagers whose lives had become data points until she'd refused to let them vanish. A plane passed overhead, red lights blinking against the dark. She followed it until it disappeared. Maybe one day she'd go back into the field. Maybe not. But whatever came next, she knew who she was now, not the soldier who followed orders, not the analyst who stayed silent, but the voice that rose when silence became betrayal. She closed her eyes and let the wind move through her hair. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from winning. Sometimes it comes from remaining, from refusing to be erased. She whispered softly to the night, words not of defiance but of peace. Some truths are worth the punishment. And somewhere deep within, the part of her that had once been broken began to heal, not because the world had changed, but because she finally had. The sun was just beginning to rise over the training grounds. Maria sat at the edge of the running track, a paper cup of coffee warming her hands. Her new life had become rhythm, early mornings, lessons, quiet evenings. She liked it that way, predictable, honest. Her students had begun to see her less as an instructor and more as something steadier, a voice that didn't echo the noise of command. For the first time in years, she felt useful again without being used. Then her comms device buzzed. "Sergeant Santos," came the voice, calm, formal. "Please report to Command Building A, priority briefing. Authorization code Alpha 9. She frowned. "There must be a mistake. I'm training detachment, not active ops." "No mistake, Sergeant. General Webb requested you personally." The line clicked dead. Maria sat there for a long moment, watching the steam rise from her cup. Webb, the man who'd pulled her from the wreckage of scandal, who'd believed in her when others wouldn't. If he was calling, something wasn't routine. When she entered the briefing room, Webb was already there. The walls hummed with projector light. Maps, satellite images, and surveillance photos covered the digital display. He turned when she entered, offering that same measured nod. At ease, Sergeant, sit. She did, heart thudding quietly. Webb tapped the control pad, zooming into a section of the map, familiar terrain, mountainous, scarred by old war routes. Gibran Province, he said. You thought you were done with it, I wish you were. Maria's stomach tightened. What's happening? After the report went public, power collapsed faster than anyone predicted. The coalition withdrew, Farouk disappeared, and local militias are fighting for control. But there's something else. He clicked again. A grainy drone image filled the screen, a convoy, half buried in sand, vehicles burned to skeletons. 3 days ago, Webb continued, an NGO medical team went missing outside the old Al-Safa region. They were investigating the same mass grave site you uncovered. Satellite picked up the wreckage yesterday. Maria's jaw clenched. Casualties? Unknown, Webb said. But we received one distress ping from a survivor before the signal died. We believe she's being held in the same area once controlled by Farouk's men, or what's left of them. She stared at the image, a wasteland she thought she'd left behind. You think Farouk's alive? Webb met her eyes. We think someone is still following his playbook, and whoever it is, they know how to vanish. She took a slow breath. Why me? Because you know that terrain. You understand the people. And frankly, because the teams we've sent before didn't make it back. Maria looked at the screen again. Sir, I'm not active ops anymore. Webb's voice softened. I know, but I also know you didn't come this far just to train recruits. You have experience no one else does. And there's something else. He paused, studying her face. One of the missing NGO members, Dr. Layla Hassan. You met her in Wardak. The name struck her like a spark. Layla's still working in the field. She was part of a relief organization documenting civilian impact assessments. She specifically requested access to your old reports. Maria's hands tightened on the table. She remembered Layla, calm, brave, the medic who treated civilians during that endless week in Wardak. They'd shared bread, stories, silence. Layla had called her the soldier who listens. She's the survivor, isn't she? Maria asked quietly. Webb didn't answer directly. We think so. The distress signal came from her ID tag. Maria leaned back, mind racing. What's the mission? Webb tapped the table. Unmarked insertion. Small advisory task force, 1 operator, 1 local contact, and you. Objective is extraction and intelligence confirmation. Time sensitive. No official record. Maria stared at him. You mean off book? He nodded. Discretion matters more than command clearance right now. She was silent for a long time. Then she asked, who's the operator? Master Sergeant Cole Ramsey, Webb said. Special operations, he'll meet you on site. Maria had heard the name, a field legend whispered about in barrack stories. The kind of soldier who did his job too well to ever make headlines. Webb's tone softened again. You don't have to say yes. After everything, you've earned your peace. Maria stared at the flickering map. The desert, the ghosts of Wardak, the unfinished story of Al-Safa. I never earned peace, she said finally. I just postponed it. Webb nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer. Then you deploy at 400. The transport plane hummed quietly through the night. Maria sat near the back, gear strapped to her legs, the rhythmic vibration steadying her heartbeat. Across from her sat Cole Ramsey, square-jawed, unreadable, with that silent calm of someone who'd learned to think 3 moves ahead of death. He broke the silence first. You're the one who called out Gibran. Maria glanced up. That what they're saying? Something like that. People have opinions about whistleblowers. She smiled faintly. They always do. Cole nodded. You pissed off a lot of brass, but you made a few of us proud. Few's enough, she said. They fell into comfortable silence after that. When the red light above the ramp flicked on, Cole checked his weapon. We drop outside the ridge. Local contacts waiting, calls himself Hattie. Used to work with the coalition before everything went to hell. Maria adjusted her headset. Used to work or still works. Cole smirked. We'll find out. The night air hit like fire when they landed, hot, dry, electric. The desert stretched beneath the stars, endless and indifferent. Their contact appeared from the shadows, a lean man in worn fatigues, scarf around his neck, eyes alert. Hattie, he said, shaking hands quickly. We must move before first light. Maria caught the faint tremor in his voice, not fear but urgency. They moved fast, traveling in silence across broken ground until the first blush of dawn touched the horizon. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, Hattie stopped and pointed. There, he whispered, the convoy site, but others have been here. I saw movement 2 nights ago. Through her binoculars, Maria scanned the wreckage. The vehicles were scorched, but there was movement, faint shadows shifting near the old schoolhouse ruins. Not scavengers, she murmured, too organized. Cole lowered his scope. 3 hostiles minimum, possible camp inside. Maria's chest tightened. That's where Layla's beacon pinged. Cole's voice was calm. Then we go. They descended quietly, moving between collapsed walls and sand-choked alleys. The air smelled of burnt fuel and dust. At the edge of the ruins, Maria crouched beside a broken window. Inside, 2 armed men sat near a lantern, their voices low. One of them held a radio. Cole gestured silently. He'd take the left. She nodded, signaling acknowledgement. In 2 swift movements, the men were down. No sound, no chaos, just precision. They moved deeper into the building. The hallways were lined with old chalkboards, bullet holes scarring the walls. Then Maria heard it, faint, rhythmic tapping, not random, intentional. Morse. She froze, listening. Laila. Her pulse spiked. She followed the sound to a locked storage room. Cole, she whispered. He knelt, picked the lock in seconds. The door creaked open, and there she was. Layla Hassan, alive though barely. Her wrist was bruised, her face drawn but defiant. When her eyes met Maria's, disbelief turned to something deeper, relief. You, she whispered, I knew someone would come. Maria helped her to her feet. You picked a dangerous place for a reunion. Layla smiled faintly. Couldn't let them erase what you started. Maria frowned. What do you mean? Layla pointed to a small satchel in the corner. Documents, records, proof that Farouk's network didn't die. It went underground, tied to the very people funding the reconstruction. Cole's jaw tightened. That's going to make a lot of enemies. Maria looked at the bag, then at Layla. You risked your life for this. Layla's eyes softened. You taught me that silence isn't neutral. Before Maria could respond, a shout echoed from outside. Cole moved to the window, eyes scanning. We've been made, 2 trucks inbound. Maria grabbed the satchel. Extraction point. Half a click north, Hattie said, but they'll be there first if we don't move. Cole's tone hardened. Then we move fast. The next minutes blurred into chaos. Dust, gunfire, shouting in languages Maria half understood. Cole returned fire with mechanical precision. Hattie guided them through back alleys as bullets sparked off stone. They reached the ridge just as the first truck skidded into view. Cole dropped to one knee, firing short, controlled bursts. Go, he barked. I'll cover. Maria turned back. Not leaving you. That's an order. She hesitated, then grabbed Layla and sprinted toward the extraction flare. The helicopter's distant thrum grew louder, slicing through the chaos. Behind her, Cole's rifle cracked again and again. Then silence. The helicopter touched down. Maria shoved Layla aboard, turned, and saw Cole running, one arm bleeding, dust swirling around him like smoke. He made it aboard just as the bird lifted. As they rose above the valley, Maria looked down. The wreckage grew small, swallowed by sand, another graveyard of unfinished wars. Layla leaned close, her voice barely audible over the rotors. You came back. Maria stared out at the horizon. No, I just stopped running. When they landed at the safe zone hours later, Webb was waiting. The moment he saw Layla, relief washed across his face. You did it, he said softly. Maria handed him the satchel. You'll want to see what's inside. He glanced at the bag, then at her. And you. She looked at the sunrise over the dunes, light spilling across land that had seen too much death. Sir, she said quietly, I think I finally understand something. Webb tilted his head. What's that? That some wars don't end. They just change shape. But if you keep showing up even once, maybe that's enough. He nodded slowly. Maybe it is. That night, Maria stood alone outside the tent, watching the stars rise above the desert. She wasn't the same soldier who'd once poured coffee for men who didn't see her. She wasn't even the same analyst who'd uncovered graves and dared to speak. She was something harder to define, not a hero, not a rebel, just a woman who refused to stop choosing decency, no matter the cost. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of distant laughter, Layla's voice mingling with the others. Maria smiled, closing her eyes. Sometimes, the redemption you seek isn't in clearing your name. It's in knowing the next time someone calls for help, you won't hesitate. And in that, she found peace, not the absence of war, but the quiet certainty that her soul still belonged to something worth serving. What do you do when the war finally ends, but the echoes never stop? For Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the answer wasn't found on any battlefield. It was found in what came after. The flight home was silent this time, not because of fear, but because silence finally meant peace. Maria sat by the window, the vast desert shrinking beneath her as the aircraft rose through clouds that glowed orange under the rising sun. The hum of the engines lulled the cabin into stillness. Across from her, Layla slept, her head resting against the window, exhaustion softening her face. Cole sat near the ramp, arm bandaged, eyes closed but alert, the kind of rest soldiers learned when real rest wasn't possible. Maria leaned her head back and watched the light shift over their faces. Every mission she'd ever been on had ended like this, not with cheers, not with flags, but with silence. And maybe that was how it was meant to be. When they landed at Andrews, General Webb was waiting again. This time, no MPs, no interrogation rooms, just him standing on the tarmac under a gray morning sky. Maria stepped off the ramp, her boots touching American soil that somehow felt both foreign and familiar. Webb nodded once, eyes scanning the group. You all made it back, he said quietly. That's enough for now. Cole saluted. We got what you needed, sir. Webb looked at the satchel Maria carried, the same one Layla had protected with her life. And what the world needs, he murmured. Layla stepped forward, smiling faintly. It's all in there. Names, accounts, transfers, proof that the same men funding peace were still buying war. Webb exhaled, long and heavy. Then history just shifted. He turned to Maria. You did it again, Sergeant. You went where most wouldn't. Maria met his gaze. I didn't do it for them, sir. I did it for her. She nodded toward Layla, and for the ones who never made it home. Webb studied her for a long moment, then said, You know, I was asked once what kind of soldier I respected most. I used to say the one who followed orders. Now, his voice softened. Now I think it's the one who follows conscience, even when it costs her everything. Maria looked away, her eyes glinting under the morning light. Conscience doesn't win medals, sir. No, Webb said, but it outlives them. 2 weeks later, Maria found herself standing in a quiet ceremony on the Pentagon lawn. It wasn't grand or crowded. A few officers, Webb, and a handful of recruits from her training detachment were there. The air smelled of spring, cut grass, faint rain, the distant murmur of the city. Webb stood at the podium, his words short and unpolished, the kind that meant more because they weren't rehearsed. Courage, he said, isn't just running toward gunfire. It's standing still when the world asks you to look away. Staff Sergeant Santos reminded all of us that honor doesn't come from comfort, it comes from conscience. He stepped forward, pinning a new ribbon beneath the silver star already on her uniform, a commendation for moral integrity and humanitarian distinction. The kind of recognition the Army rarely gave, but couldn't deny. Maria stood at attention, not proud exactly but whole. Layla watched from the sidelines, her eyes shining. Cole gave a subtle nod, and for a brief second, Maria let herself feel something she hadn't in years, not triumph, but quiet validation. When the ceremony ended, she walked to the edge of the lawn, where the trees cast long shadows across the grass. Layla joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I still remember," Layla said, handing one to her, "you pouring coffee for those generals. Funny how full circle works." Maria smiled softly. "I guess some things never change." "Except this time," Layla said. "They're the ones listening." They stood there in silence, watching cadets jog past in formation, their cadence calls echoing faintly across the field. That evening, Maria visited Arlington. She walked among the rows of white stones until she found the name she'd been looking for, Captain David Reeves. She knelt, brushing her fingers across the engraved letters. "Hey, Captain," she whispered, "guess I made a mess again." The wind rustled the grass around her. "You'd probably tell me I should have played it safe," she continued softly. "But then you'd smile that stupid smile and say, 'Yeah, but you wouldn't be you if you did.'" Her voice trembled slightly. "We got them this time. The ones who thought they could bury truth like they buried you. Layla's safe. The story's out. And maybe that's enough." She sat there for a while, the fading sunlight painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. A light breeze brushed her hair, and she closed her eyes. "You taught me something out there," she whispered. "That courage isn't loud, it's steady. It's the quiet decision to do the right thing, even when no one's watching." She rose slowly, giving one last salute before walking back toward the gates. Weeks passed. Life, as it always did, settled into its quiet rhythm. Maria moved into a small apartment near the water, nothing fancy, just peace. Every morning she ran along the river path, the world waking up in shades of gray and pink. Some mornings she'd stop halfway, watching the sunlight ripple over the surface. Sometimes she'd think about Wardeck, the laughter of children, the smell of smoke and pomegranates. Sometimes about Gibran, the graves, the choices, the faces she couldn't forget. But more often now, she thought about the small moments that kept her human, the laughter during training, Layla's stubborn kindness, Webb's quiet loyalty, the simple act of surviving with decency intact. Her body bore the scars of war, her spirit bore the weight of truth, but her eyes, they carried peace. One afternoon, she received a letter, official seal, heavy paper. Inside was a single sentence. "In recognition of exemplary integrity and service beyond duty, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos is hereby promoted to Master Sergeant, effective immediately." No fanfare, no speech, just words, quiet, dignified, final. She placed the letter on her desk next to her medals. The silver star, the new ribbon, the photo from Wardeck Reeves smiling in the dirt, arms slung around her shoulder. She looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "We made it, Captain." Later that night, she sat on her balcony, coffee in hand, the city lights flickering across the water. The hum of distant traffic blended with the faint whistle of the wind. Her thoughts drifted, not to battles or commands, but to a single memory. The moment years ago when a general had noticed the silver star on her chest, and the world had finally seen her for what she was. That moment had changed everything, not because someone recognized her, but because it reminded her that worth isn't given. It's proven, again and again, in silence, in resistance, in persistence. She thought about how far she'd come, from humiliation to honor, from serving coffee to serving truth. And she realized something simple. Respect, real respect, isn't handed down by rank or medal. It's earned in the moments when no one's watching, when you choose what's right even when it costs you everything. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from below, neighbors, alive and unburdened. Maria smiled. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, words meant not for medals or history, but for her own peace. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. At dawn, she walked along the river again. The light spilled over the horizon, golden and soft. For the first time, she felt the world not as something to survive, but as something she still belonged to. A jogger passed and nodded politely. A child tossed crumbs to a bird near the water's edge. The air smelled of rain and beginnings. Maria stopped, letting the moment stretch, the warmth on her face, the peace in her chest, the quiet hum of a life rebuilt from courage and scars. She thought about all the soldiers who would come after her, young, hopeful, uncertain. And she hoped they'd understand one truth she'd learned the hardest way possible. That courage isn't always found in battlefields. Sometimes it's in boardrooms, in decisions, in defiance. Sometimes it's in choosing to stand when silence would be safer. And as the sun rose higher, she whispered one last time to the morning air, not as a prayer, not as a command, but as a truth she had finally earned. Honor isn't about being seen. It's about seeing and refusing to look away. The world would go on spinning, new wars, new names, new stories. But somewhere in a quiet apartment by the river lived a woman who had once been invisible and had become, through grace and grit, a reminder that the strongest soldiers are not the ones who shout the loudest. They're the ones who endure, who speak when no one listens, and who, even after everything, still believe in what's right. And for Maria Santos, that was enough.